Let's start tonight in Nigeria, where government revenues dropped by 42% in July due to a combination of oil theft and production outages. The month-on-month revenue data is an enormous red flag, pointing out just how damaging oil theft is to public finances in that country. According to the Accountant General, federal government revenues were down to about $3 billion. That's the lowest monthly figure so far in 2013, and it's down from about $5.35 billion in June. Oil theft has cut government earnings for several months this year, and by even more compared to 2011. Military authorities in the restless Niger Delta say they are renewing efforts to catch oil thieves, while the country's oil minister, Diezani Alison Madueke, says she's reaching out to foreign governments to stop the buying of oil stolen in Nigeria. Why is oil important? Well, it accounts for about 80% of government revenues in Nigeria. The crude savings account is often used to fund the budget deficit if oil revenues do fall below target. Now, strikes that have shut down plants owned by companies as diverse as Toyota and General Motors in South Africa are almost guaranteed to spread to gold mines and construction firms after wage talks in those particular sectors failed. The National Union of Mine Workers and the United Association of South Africa have already been issued with non-resolution certificates, and they are expected to issue 48-hour strike notices next week on Monday. About 30,000 workers in South Africa's car industry downed the tools this week, and their dispute is yet to be resolved.
South Africa's auto strike entered its fifth day on Friday and has affected global car makers operating in the country, including Toyota, Ford and General Motors. The stoppage is estimated to cost the industry about 600 million rand, just about $60 million a day in lost production, according to the National Association of Automobile Manufacturers of South Africa, NAMSA. The country faces a strike wave across leading sectors of the economy, including its struggling gold industry, already squeezed by rising costs and falling bullion prices, and the construction sector that has been the latest to warn of strike action next week.
We're not going to see the strike last indefinitely. We're not going to see huge amounts of violence and intimidation. What we're going to see is the auto manufacturers capitulate relatively quickly in the strike and accede to workers' demands.
The labour strife has also battered the rand, which dropped to a new four-year low against the dollar on Thursday after wage talks in the gold sector stalled, and the main mine union said it planned to ask members to vote on a strike.
Ultimately, the motor manufacturers are not going to pay for these increases in wages. Consumers will pay. The motor manufacturers will simply transfer to consumers the increase in wage costs. So workers will win, the car makers will win, and consumers will suffer.
South Africa's car manufacturing sector accounts for 6% of gross domestic product. The strike was called last week by the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, its largest manufacturing union, which wants pay hikes of 20% for its members, compared with inflation at 5.5%. Companies have offered 6%.
In relation to wages, we've submitted that we want a double digit. When the dispute arose, we started at 14%. We are clear now, in order for us to revert the strike, we believe that anything from 10% and above can revert the strike.
Toyota said 80% of its 8,000-strong South African workforce had not turned up for work. BMW in South Africa said the strike was costing it 345 cars a day. Wages in the auto sector range from about $850 a month for basic workers to $1,800 a month for qualified technicians. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Let's get some feedback on the developments in South Africa so far this week. The story so far has been all about labour strife. What do people outside the country think about it? CCTV's Melanie Ralph is live in London. She joins us right about now from that location. Melanie, some analysts outside and of course inside South Africa do fear that the labour strife we're seeing so far could potentially lead to credit downgrades, as we saw earlier in the year. Is that a concern shared in London?
Yeah, Rama, no doubt the ratings agencies will be on the prowl. The central bank doesn't have much room to manoeuvre in the face of disruption to these key industries in South Africa. The government will have to think of other ways to keep growth on track. And some analysts say they simply don't have the measures to draw on to do things like that, like a potential interest rate cut, for example. We've seen in the not so distant past the credit ratings agencies highlighting that violence and strikes in South Africa could trigger more sovereign downgrades. So the threat is very real, especially if we see the rand tumble. And we're already seeing investors shift away from the emerging markets thanks to Fed tapering talk. So certainly it's a very challenging environment for South Africa from almost all angles.
Let's talk about something else that happened in the recent past. In April this year, Mercedes were talking about expanding output in the production plants in South Africa. But given the developments that they've seen in the last couple of weeks, is that plan completely off or at best simply on hold?
Well, these ongoing strikes or threats of strikes would make any company uneasy about expanding in South Africa. Overall, the car industry isn't doing too bad. The luxury Mercedes-Benz brand has seen some decent sales this year, with some workers calling for up to 20% pay hikes. Not just Mercedes-Benz will be looking to the books to see how these wage hikes and strikes impact their business models. To a certain extent, companies who open in Africa go in with their eyes open, almost expecting to come across issues of strikes and labour disputes. Up until now, Mercedes has overcome an illegal strike earlier this year in May, where they saw production affected from the two-day strike. So we'll see how the car sector weathers the latest strike storm as to where they go from here.
Finally, though, the fact does remain that the labour problems in South Africa are structural and deeply, deeply rooted. There are no easy policy solutions for the ANC, are there? Especially in light of the fact that they have to go to the ballot next year.
Yeah, well, the central bank has warned about the inflationary impact of high wage settlements on consumer prices. On the other end of the scale, workers are stretched financially and often have several dependents, and throw a high unemployment rate into the mix, and it makes for a very difficult situation for all concerned. These strikes have not only seen slowing growth but the loss of lives, two facts that can't be brushed under the carpet at election time. South Africa needs to invest in existing relationships as much as new ones. London is an important market, but some analysts say ignored by senior South African policymakers. But some economists say hopefully the upcoming South Africa-UK government bilateral talks will help to address this.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Melanie Ralph over in London, giving us somewhat divergent feedback from what's going on in South Africa. Let's move on to Zimbabwe now. The tourism sector in that country could get a shot in the arm in the near future as dozens of tourism industry leaders from right around the world, quite literally, head to Victoria Falls for a summit there. Hotel bookings are at an all-time high, in some cases going up by as much as 100%. As CCTV's Farai Makutua now reports.
Tourism is one of Zimbabwe's star performers. Visitors from traditional markets like Europe and North America are coming back. And the contribution of the sector to GDP is set to hit a record 14% by 2014.
We've gone through a period of decline, but we were a very well-stocked country in terms of tourism product. So that product is still all around, and a lot of it has been improving over the last few years.
Maintaining this performance requires improved infrastructure, better rail links in country, and refurbished facilities such as hotels and airports. Money to fulfill this wish list could be hard to come by. But the industry has weathered more turbulent storms. And after last month's peaceful election, there is renewed confidence. The chief executive of the largest hotel group says development banks are now willing to put their money here.
We are now sending that message across that we have been telling you we're a safe destination. In fact, we're never actually in a safe destination. It was the perception that was created.
The upcoming General Assembly of the United Nations World Tourism Organization is a bonus. The body seeks to develop policies to promote tourism. Zimbabwe is co-hosting the summit with Zambia.
The exposure is really what this is all about. It's about a marketing opportunity.
Officials say a sustainable tourism strategy hinges on a collective drive to market the region's combined attractions.
tourists don't fly all the way to Southern Africa just to look at Vic Falls, and they don't fly all the way to Southern Africa just to look at Cape Town.
The Assembly hopes to come up with tangible steps towards regional marketing, easing travel requirements like visas and ensuring Africa increases its share of global tourism, which is still just 3%. The 5-day summit will officially be opened on Sunday. Farai Makutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's take it back to a lead story today. The labour strife in South Africa. Pretty much a big story really here as far as African business is concerned this entire week. You've heard the perspective from London. Let's now take it to South Africa. CCTV Sumitra Naidu standing by in Johannesburg. Sumitra, I do understand that NUM members are marching in protest against a wage hike offer from Eskom of about 5.6% tomorrow. Tell us more about that.
That's right, Rama. The National Union of Mine Workers, together with construction workers and the South African Federated Chamber of Civil Engineers, will all gather to march tomorrow, most of them marching in different provinces to the offices of Eskom to hand over a memorandum of demands. The statement coming out today from the National Union of Mine Workers said that, they're demanding that Eskom stop bullying its employees and starts acceding to their demands. Further on in that statement, the National Union of Mine Workers saying that the arrogance of Eskom, construction companies and the mining companies have pushed us too far. So that's the kind of information we're getting out so far. That strike set that march tomorrow set to happen around midday.
Indeed, but aren't these strikes right across South Africa's economy really just setting up quite the vicious feedback loop here? Because on one hand, if you have workers who go on strike, you've got lost output, and then to make up for that, if the manufacturers do capitulate, then you end up with increased prices and so on. Where will this all really end?
Oh, absolutely, Rama. And you know, the impact is being felt already. The automotive sector strike is costing this economy $60 million a day. The pending gold workers strike will cost the economy around $34 million a day. And you know, we saw the impact that lower production, lower productivity can have. We saw our economy coming into just under 3% of GDP at the end of 2012. This year, GDP expected to come in at 2%. The economy is weak already. Last year, we saw every single sector strike. The gold mining sector in particular cost the economy 3 billion rand. So the impact is being felt every single year because strike action has become a part of the landscape of South African wage talks. It happens often. So it is a huge concern because it does have this vicious cycle because, you know, the economy suffers because of lower output.
Indeed, we'll absolutely be there for the time being. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV Sumitra Naidu live in Johannesburg, South Africa. We'll certainly be keeping tabs on that story about the labour strife in the biggest economy on the continent right here on Africa Live. Let's move on to a first break of the hour. Here's what's coming up next. From ruin to recovery, we'll be taking a look at Malawi's ongoing economic transformation when we return.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. Economic recovery efforts in Malawi are starting to bear fruit nearly a year after the country's president imposed some pretty drastic austerity measures, which included devaluing the currency and slashing her own salary by a third. Now, like elsewhere in the world, austerity measures in Malawi have proven to be quite unpopular. But the one key unflinching believer in the measures in force so far has been the country's first female president, Joyce Banda. She spoke to CCTV's Peter Akaba.
Malawi is a small southern African country that is aptly described as the warm heart of Africa. It is landlocked, bordered by Zambia, Mozambique and Tanzania, with a landmass area of just over 118,000 square kilometers and a population of some 16 million people. Gross domestic product as a measure of economic activity grew by 1.8% in 2012, a slowdown from 3.8% registered in 2011. This was mainly on account of substantial reductions in the growth of agriculture, manufacturing, wholesale and retail trade. In July of 2013, headline inflation was posted at an eye-watering 34.2%. Overseas aid accounts for a solid 40% of the budget, and in President Joyce Banda's own words, the economy was in a shambles and has only just started to turn around.
Malawi is at a position where it is quickly trying to recover its economy, but Malawi is very, very clear in its mind that that's the route we must take. I want Malawi to move very quickly from aid to trade. And I know that for that to happen, we must create the environment for investment to grow.
Near economic collapse only recently brought the country to the brink of ruin, with long queues forming at gas stations, following a fuel shortage occasioned by a lack of foreign exchange after donors withdrew funding. That is now in the past, with the government saying it is working to improve the business environment.
I have ensured that we work extremely hard to change some of the laws that were standing in the way of investment. Create an enabling environment for people to invest, both from outside and locally.
A ray of hope for Malawi has been the recent discoveries that indicate that the country is richly endowed with commercial quantities of various minerals.
A geomapping exercise is underway, supported by the World Bank, to quantify what is it that we have. I mean, how much do we have? But definitely they have found that we have rubies, we have gold, we have rare earth. We have huge deposits of minerals, oil, gas in the country.
Malawi plans to take lessons from other mineral-rich nations extremely seriously, especially bearing in mind the high levels of poverty in that country.
Mining has a lifespan, and I must ensure that Malawians must benefit fully from the resources that we have.
Malawi sits to the west of Africa's third largest lake, Lake Malawi, which is believed to be rich in hydrocarbon deposits of oil and gas. Malawi then is set to become one of Africa's newest energy producers. And if the resolve of this government is anything to go by, then the standards of living of one of Africa's poorest nations is bound to get a big boost. Peter Wakaba, CCTV, in Lilongwe, Malawi.
You can, of course, catch more of that interview with the head of state who sold the country's presidential jet as she discusses the Malawian economy, her elation at being elected to the chair of SADC, and a lot more on this edition of Talk Africa with British Marshall on Saturday. Now, let's move on to something different on the eastern coast. Kenya's head of state, Uhuru Kenyatta, has been in China all of this week, where a range of bilateral deals worth about $5 billion were signed. Most of those deals focused on debt financing for infrastructure, and they tend to overshadow other critical little details of commercial ties between these two countries, as CCTV's Clementine Logan will now explain.
China is often touted as Africa's biggest bilateral trading partner, but that perspective obscures the fact that the bulk of trade between the two sides is dominated by commodities, especially oil, and only then in a handful of countries. In that respect, Kenya is no different from the several other net oil importers in Africa. In 2012, for example, Kenya's total import bill was well over $15 billion. 12% of those goods came from China, but a bigger amount came from India, with the United Arab Emirates, where Kenya imports most of her oil and petroleum products, coming in third. The immediate point of contact for most Kenyans with Chinese goods is through their mobile telecommunications. Between them, Huawei and ZTE have won a slew of multi-million-dollar contracts across the country's IT sector. Right now, Huawei, alongside Ericsson, is building a 2,400-kilometre-long fibre optic network for the country's top mobile operator, Safaricom. The foundation for the delivery of data to Kenyan consumers, and in some cases the devices used to consume that data, has a Made in China tag on it. However, where Kenyan exports are concerned, it's a very different story. China's not listed among the top destinations for Kenyan goods and services. That's a list dominated by Uganda, Tanzania, the UK, Pakistan, the Netherlands and Egypt. It's that imbalance in trade that has policymakers here concerned, and which President Uhuru Kenyatta wanted to address on his first state visit to China earlier this week. Clementine Logan, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Over in West Africa, the Chinese pay-TV firm StarTimes is celebrating 3 years of operations in Nigeria. Its local management there hoping for a similar result in future. Now, available data shows over 1.5 million customers have subscribed to the pay-TV firm services since its inception in 2010. StarTimes has over 70 channels on its stable, and over 40% of its content is sourced directly from Nigeria. Cape Town, South Africa, in the meantime, is rapidly building up a reputation as a hotbed for the development of new mobile phone tech. Dozens of young developers are coming up with the latest must-have application, and there's one that could quite literally get the country talking. CCTV's Travis Andrews now explains.
Few South Africans live without a cell phone these days, and they provide a ready-made market for Cape Town's app developers. Glenn Steen has already created several. With his latest idea, though, the 24-year-old thinks he's hit the right button. An app that instantly translates each of South Africa's 11 official languages.
It's quite simple. You take the phone out, you select the language you want to translate from, the language you want to translate to, and then you choose from a list of phrases, and then each phrase you select gives you the translation, which you can then hear as an audio.
At the click of a mouse, the young developer furnishes his app with various pronunciations and translations. A simple enough idea, like an instant high-tech phrase book, but in a country with so many different languages, Aweza could make a lot of sense. A very useful tool in helping South Africans better understand each other.
I think that this app has a lot of relevance in today's society in South Africa, where there are 11 official languages, and as a result, a lot of people experience communication barriers based on all these languages. And so the aim is really to break down those language barriers and encourage communication between people from different cultures.
Aweza just one of scores of apps under development here, from retinal scanners to shopping applications.
We have some great innovations, apps that help people save energy, like HomeBug, and apps that really are very interactive with their users.
It's an industry that shows no sign of slowing down. All it takes to create a good app is a little talent and a lot of ideas. And this city is full of both. Travis Andrews, CCTV, Cape Town.
Now, here's something a little more bizarre for you. Ever since the takeover of northern Mali by armed Islamists in 2012, the city of Gao has been crippled by some pretty severe electricity shortages out there. Now, even after its liberation by French and Malian forces in January this year, blackouts are still pretty endemic. So in order to enjoy a cold drink, the city's residents have to rely on trucks from the capital, Bamako, more than 1,000 kilometers away, which transport huge blocks of ice all the way up to Gao. Pretty expensive affair, that. Now, quick run through the markets. Let's see what's going on as far as the markets are concerned. In Africa, the all-share index in the Nigerian capital ending the day higher only marginally, so up 0.04 percentage points. The all-share index in South Africa in the red, down by about 2 percentage points. The 20-share index in Nairobi in the green, up 0.15. And the Egyptian market, today being Friday, of course, is closed for the day. Now, with your fix for sports and plenty more, here's Beatrice Marshall.
Rama, many thanks indeed. The sports coming up next to headlines.